am a BACP member and counsellor, and I'm one of the counsellors here at cliniQ.
So excited to be here with Remy. And I'm Michelle Ross. I'm the founder of cliniQ, as well as a director of wellbeing services and a therapist at cliniQ as well. And as you can see, cliniQ is based in the UK. So our main part of area is in London. And but now, because we'll talk through online, we can see people from across the UK online. So just a little bit more about cliniQ, and we are very much rooted in our communities as trans, queer, non-binary people, and our services are inclusive of family members and partners who are part of our community as well. And that's a really important aspect, because we're not trans in isolation usually from other people. And so, and a lot of our therapists self-identify as cisgender. So it's, there's aspects of inclusivity of a range of genders about the person, not necessarily about the gender.
Yeah, and I joined cliniQ as part of that wider community, having a trans husband, and it's been through my work and through my journey that then I've gone on to self-identify as non-binary, and it's just been a whole journey.
It's lovely to see that journey of you and that kind of self-exploration. Yeah, definitely. And it brings you permission sometimes when further things around different identities like non-binary or queer, I think it gives like, this is okay, and within that internal exploration of who you might relate to or how you might want others to relate to you is really important.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely about being in a gender-affirming environment. So we are going to be talking about cliniQ, making you aware of our services and what we offer, with a focus on counselling, and in particular during this time of lockdown and COVID, how we've made the transition onto being face-to-face mainly, onto online support and some of the self-care that takes.
And that's been a really important development, born out of that kind of crisis in terms of COVID-19 and lockdown. And so it was a really important area for us to develop, and develop quickly, but ethically and with governance, and so and safeguarding, making sure that it was safe for people to be online in a therapeutic setting. And of course, not everyone can.
Not everyone can. Not everyone sadly has a safe home environment, a private space to be able to engage.
Just to touch on slightly a bit more about cliniQ, in that we attempt to be holistic, but our holistic is a kind of more like well-being, because we can't offer all the services of health that might be the whole person. But so we very much aware of the mental health and counselling and well-being aspect. And we're an HIV and sexual health service. We were the first in the UK, well, in the whole of Europe, of our kind, that was by trans people for trans people. And we've been delivering services for 8 years, well, just over 8 years. And the idea for cliniQ started in 2010. So it's been a journey. We looked on your journey earlier, and it's been a journey for us and for our communities, really, in developing trust in who we are, that we're rooted within our communities. And our physical space is based in King's College Hospital, which is a major hospital in the UK, especially in England. And so that's where we do a lot of the clinical, and we're still open. It's just that all because of COVID-19, we can't have a space full of community space of 20 people plus, because that's what we'd see within 3 hours. Now we're by appointments only, so people have to arrive on that time, and they can have a range of services. But because of social distancing, we can't have that community space in the same way. But people are still getting a clinical service as well as our therapy services online.
I think it's really important for me to touch on, how important it was that it didn't disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people still need hormone injections, or they need, other kinds of injections or blood tests, for various hormone levels, which we do a lot of. And so there's other sexual health clinical services, which actually people can get a home testing kit online as well as an HIV testing. But we still prescribe PrEP, although in England at this time, people have been getting a 6-month PrEP if they're still taking it in the lockdown. And they're about to, things around PrEP in the UK or in England about to change. It's going to be wider available. Well, I often think about barriers. I mean, you know, we've often touched on barriers to services, or just barriers for trans people. And it's not only trans people that face those kind of barriers, but I think of them when I think of systemic, I think of institutional, societal, and the internal, the kind of self stigma, if you want to turn it that way. So the societal transphobia and the institutional transphobia. So institutional could be education, it can be employment, it could be, you know, universities, it could be hospitals, it could be healthcare settings, and then the societal, the family, the friends, the cultural, or the areas that you live in, you know, all those transphobias, and how they reinforce the internal thing with that I'm not good enough as a trans person to have healthcare. I'm not good enough to look after myself and self-care. And do I even know what self-care looks like when nobody's told me, for me, what self-care looks like? And, you know, so, and then there's that kind of gender validation through sex. If you have low self-esteem, and lots of people can do that, not just trans people, but sometimes with low self-esteem comes that, you know, having been validated through the sex you have been by other people. And that can often sometimes lead to high rates of HIV, especially in trans women.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you've brought those 3 different areas and barriers, because before we see a client, before clients in a room with me, say, or yourself, they've overcome that. They've done so much work often to be there, and all of that's coming into the room and will be looked at. And I guess it's so important that with an awareness of the journey that someone's taken to engage in therapy, that we didn't just stop it and kind of abandon people at a time when they may need it more, when they're being impacted by what's going on in their lives in a new way, this uncertainty.
Yeah, it's so important. Absolutely. And I really liked what you said. By the time they get to us, they've done something, they've got far something to reach out to us. Since what happened in the States, there's a lot of stuff around racism and the lack of intersectionality, really. And, you know, when I usually talk about this, I often think about sometimes intersectionality is kind of like a buzzword, and I've asked people to unpack what intersectionality means, and I think some people don't really understand it. Don't know what you think about that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that I feel it, I live it. Sexuality is in every part of my being, but like the word, trying to use it in context can be quite limiting, and so I'd rather speak from my unapologetic Black queerness rather than talking about how that intersects. But I do feel that it's so important to have awareness of that, and to be having awareness of your own identity and what I may represent for a client as a Black queer person, also what their identity may represent to me, and work with that and actually acknowledge and bring it into the room. And I think that if you work in an absence of intersectionality, then you are quite openly communicating to a client that only parts of yourself are welcome.
Yeah.
So bring your transness, but don't bring your Blackness, or your transness, but not your mental health. And so it's about bring it all, and blow me down with it. Be there.
Present.
Yeah.
And some therapists, as you're saying, might only want to be with your transness, and all they might see is the trans stuff, but not the rest of the intersections of your life. And so I often think you can't have good practice without intersectionality. And I know I just use that word, but really it's all what you just said.
Yeah. And I think also now, you know, we're delivering counselling in a time we're seeing mass riots, the Black Lives Matter movement. if a counsellor is not acknowledging the blackness or the brownness of their client and saying, actually, I see what's going on in the media. How is that impacting you? And not giving that permission. That is an active way that a counsellor could unintentionally cause harm right now and not allow the client to bring their truth in this moment in the context of anger and rage and activism.
Absolutely. And I think for me as a white trans person, I need to acknowledge my white privilege, because I walk with that white privilege from the day that I was born until the day that I die. And I get that automatically. And sometimes I'm not always aware of that white privilege. And sometimes I have to think about what my white privilege means to others and to myself. And I might not always be able to change aspects of that, but my white skin supports the system. It automatically, no matter how much I'm aware, it just supports the system. And because I have that privilege, and I can't know what it's like to walk with another skin.
Yeah. Allow clients to be and nurture them, all of them.
Absolutely. And that's what therapy is about, that allowing to be, that being with, not necessarily doing to, but the being with. And I think a lot of trans people, and in this particular setting around the network zone, you know, a lot of trans people will be seeing this. And to speak to trans people who might be seeing this, knowing that there are services, knowing there are people out there that can see you in all aspects of yourself.
Yeah.
I might be making a statement that's from a privileged place there, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, well, what I think that we're constantly challenging at cliniQ is who is in our therapeutic team, who are delivering our services, and are they representing the communities that you know that we're supporting and offering services to. And I think as long as we're constantly challenging that and being open to criticism and judgment, so if that isn't your experience as speaking to the people in the network, then we want to hear that, because that's the learning, that's the challenge.
Absolutely. And when I criticize a white person, I feel that really difficult because I criticize for being white. But that is kind of part of the reality, what other people have to face on a daily basis. And I'm not talking about white people, I'm talking about people of color and black people, you know. So I have to sit with that feeling that comes up in me, like, no, I'm not this, but actually what part of me is. So this is a slide briefly about, we mentioned earlier about being online, our therapy being online. That means either doing it like Remy and I are doing it now on a Zoom call or other kind of video call. And it can be done by phone as well, but usually it's done in this way. And so all our well-being service, mentoring, counselling, peer support. And now we can say wherever you are in the UK, we can see you. And actually, we might be able to reach further afield, but we've got to be aware of the time differences.
Yeah.
cliniQ is a winner in 2019, the Trans Organisation Diversity Awards. I just thought I'd put that in there.
No, it's important. Put it in, push it to the front. COVID has brought about us challenging the way of working with going online, but actually it doesn't mean that it doesn't stay in place. That desire to increase our network and reach further afield, actually, we've now been given a tool, or we're now using a tool to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see people that couldn't access, and you hear eventually soon from someone else in our therapy saying that our therapist saying, you know, we reach people that couldn't access our services before, and it's helping to change things for people.
I'm going to sort of explore, for me, my experience of the services going online. And I think the most important thing was to acknowledge that we were working in a midst of trauma and had a real overwhelming sense of where to begin. Where do we start? Do we go online? I think, actually, Michelle, you had to answer those questions. The directors had to answer those questions. And actually, in terms of my well-being, it was great that I wasn't left in a position as a counsellor to have to reach a decision about, do I see clients? Do they have symptoms? That was completely taken away from me.
Mm. Yeah. So when you say it was taken away from you, can you say more about that? Because that feels like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess as soon as lockdown hit, there was so much information and it wasn't clear what was true. So actually, I felt overwhelmed. I was feeling my own sense of uncertainty and being overwhelmed. And I knew that I wanted to support my clients. And I think in that, if I was in a position where I was going into seeing clients face to face, I would have maybe ignored or not engaged with my own needs around maintaining safety. So for me, being a counsellor at cliniQ, it was good that it was, I don't know the process, so maybe you could explain the process behind that, but I was brought into a discussion of we want to continue our work, but we want to be safe and do it safely. We'd like to bring it online. How do you feel about being online with your clients? That was just like,
Yes, exactly, and that was like a physical response you had then, a psychological response. Well, what do I do? Where do I go from here? Almost, and it's like, in a way, the choice wasn't ours. It wasn't yours. It was like we didn't have to go online, but we felt there was a need to do that and to continue. And I know I felt a real sense of loss.
mm,
I felt impacted, and I felt, how do I respond to the whole that's happening around COVID-19 and yet still support people? And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to, because I was feeling my life in some ways had been taken away from me, or aspects of my life. It hadn't, it changed.
yeah.
And that's what I had to come to terms with.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that still, I was working with clients before I got to a place of acceptance. I was
Yeah,
not there yet. And I wasn't pretending I was there yet if that came into the room. I wasn't at a place of accepting these circumstances of not going out. That
yeah.
would take time.
Well, yeah, that's. I know we're smiling, but that's quite powerful, isn't it? Really. I mean, I don't know if any other people have, but I think most of us, well, I've never faced what we're facing now with COVID and the changes that's brought about. I know that's global, mostly. But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm sitting here knowing that those listening to this will have had their own experience of COVID, their own experience of information, whether that was coming to you quickly, slowly, and having
mm,
to make decisions in that time. I had to acknowledge that in the midst of trauma, I was having a trauma response. And so being able to make decisions was harder. I needed more time.
yeah. And some communities are a bit harder by COVID than other communities.
Yeah.
And, and that really highlights a real that imbalance or something. I can't find the words for that, what I'm trying to say. But it was already there, but it just shows something with deaths. Yeah. And I've no idea at the moment about how many trans people have been so impacted or died because of COVID. I don't know. Those figures would not be recorded because they don't
Exactly.
have a way of recording them.
Exactly. And so in the danger of not having data, like right back to the beginning,
Mm,
actually what I feel is like the healing then, without knowing those people don't have faces or names, actually there's something about denial of healing. And I think maybe I've got off, but that's it. Like it breaks about the community because community can't come together and acknowledge that
yeah,
their community have been lost in this.
absolutely. And thank goodness for online. I think a lot of trans people have been used to some aspects of online connecting with
Mm.
people. Um, you know, so yeah, I'm just trying to look for a hope there because trauma is powerful, isn't it? And you mentioned trauma at the start, and it can be powerful.
The therapeutic approach. So I really brought this about how I think and feel, or how I felt about therapy, and how actually this situation has changed things. So one of the key things for me as a practitioner is that I always see clients in the center,
Mm.
the center of the therapeutic relationship. They hold the focus. And but actually, I think that with that, there comes a misconception that as a therapist, that you don't have to be present in that relationship.
Yes. Them.
Yeah, them. And how present and how aware of yourself you need to be to put a client in the center. And if we look at intersectionality, as we talked about before, putting a client at the center, especially if they're a marginalized client, like they're trans, they experience racial discrimination, mental health discrimination, actually that is revolutionary, because they're not in the center in the systems that we live in and we exist within.
Yeah.
And actually, yeah, and I just think I want to acknowledge that it takes a lot of work on yourself as a therapist to be able to hold the center and to hold the client in focus.
Absolutely. Definitely. And you know, if you think about the first, like you said, trauma, and when you're in that trauma, and then to say, oh, the client at the center, wow, you know, what else? And being in the relationship,
Yeah.
you know, as well.
Yeah. And I think the other misconception I had, or thing that I felt about my approach, was my counselling is delivered face to face.
Yeah.
And then, so will I be any good? Will I still be able to connect? Will there be a relationship? Will it form? Like, I had to ask those questions of myself, whether consciously engage with it. All of my anxiety about going online was like, will it make sense? Will I still be a therapist if I'm working in this different way?
Yeah. I can totally relate to that. You know, can I sit okay and well, I'm because I don't like being videoed, and yet, you know, how would that be? Totally get what you're saying.
And I think that's, again, not being video, but in this like losing online video conferencing, you're seeing yourself. So
Yeah.
I use my hands a lot. Man.
Yeah. I know. I mean, yeah, you can make it so you just see the other person, which
Oh,
is not now.
but, well, I've already from this taken away something to embed in my practice. But yeah, but also for clients, what's it like to see yourself? You
Yeah.
know, how does that feel if, your body image is something that you're bringing into the space, if you're struggling to look at yourself in the mirror, and then potentially you don't know, as I didn't know, that you can just see the other person, that can add another layer to the challenge of therapy.
Absolutely. Because I might be distracted by how my hair looks or something like that. So how do I stay with them in the center and me in the relationship? Or I don't know.
It does, and I've experienced freezing, and actually that's been difficult to. I've owned it. I've been congruent. Actually, I didn't hear that last thing, the computer glitch. The other thing I was going to touch on is environment, and we have great contracts at cliniQ, I'd say, that tell clients about the space they're choosing and get them to consider that, because actually you can gather a lot of information about someone from their background, and you want the client to be aware of that, so they're bringing what they want into the space.
That's great. I love what you just said because, you know, it's like we can think about it beforehand, knowing that it needs to be a bit clearer or something. But clients might not always be aware of that and what the messages are, what information that they're sending or we are picking up on being nosy about. I mean, no, just picking up. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. Oh,
Heidi.
I think I've already spoken a lot about what this slide relates to, but counsellors are offering therapeutic and support at a time they're experiencing trauma, and so it's important, I think, to be aware of if you're experiencing trauma. What's your response? How do you respond? Is it like, for me, I know it's going to take me longer to process things, so then if I before sessions, I give a longer lead in time, and I'm clear with clients, these are the days I'm available to be communicated with, putting those hard boundaries in, because I know that if I don't have enough if a client needs to communicate something to me and there's not enough time for me to process that, I can't, and that's going to impact me and that relationship.
Absolutely. I love what you said then. It's like the impact there and how that processing of that. Absolutely.
And also the significance of the therapeutic relationship now. cliniQ, we look at sexual health and well-being, relationships, intimacy. For some of our clients, that's all shut down their intimate world as they knew it. And so I think the significance is that the relationship is an intimate relationship, maybe in a time when that's disappeared or is not present in the same way. And so I had to look at, how do I nurture myself to be the best me in this relationship, to be able to be present.
Yeah, and intimacy, as you said, is, well, it's so important as well, or can be, and yet it's shut down on all levels, possibly. You know, that intimacy with other people, if you're not already living with someone, that intimacy of sex, that intimacy of relationship, and with lots of different relationships. I mean, not just a sexual or romantic relationship, but that intimacy seems really lacking in some ways.
Absolutely. And also, what the things that I would do when I'm feeling down or impacted by like a lack of intimacy in my life might be to go for a walk, or to be in nature, things that were restricted too. So actually, while we're looking at self-care, the way in which you may self-care needs to adapt in the time of lockdown, because it might not be safe to self-care in that way. So I've taken a lot more bubble baths instead of going for that walk.
Or whatever works.
Yeah,
Bubble away, I think.
exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm currently in my second year of training to be a counsellor, and I'm also one of the counsellors at cliniQ. I would describe myself as a trans man or as transmasculine, and my pronouns are he, him. I was initially quite anxious about moving counselling online. I think for a few reasons, one being that I'm a trainee and I had zero experience of working online along with a lot of my classmates prior to COVID-19. But I did some online training, I spoke to my supervisor, spoken to colleagues and classmates, and that's really been helpful. The distance that being on camera or being over the phone can provide is enough that it might allow some people to feel more able to open up than they would face to face. It's enabled maybe more people to access services who may not have been able to access before as easily. It's been quite hard at times to manage what clients bring to sessions that can be quite heavy material. Trying to judge whether a silence is a reflective one or if something else is going on. It's hard when you can't see somebody's face. Say for instance, if you have a telephone counselling session, and I think having to really be attuned to things like that has taken a lot more out of me than face-to-face sessions. So I've found that it helps when I have bigger gaps between sessions than I would if I was seeing someone face-to-face. On a personal level, it's been quite difficult to balance my personal life and private space with seeing clients online. All of a sudden, the space where I sleep and try and relax has also become the place where I attend my lectures, where I see clients, where I have personal therapy, where I have supervision. It's all kind of in one space and it was all overlapping. What helped was being able to express some of this in supervision, having a check-in and saying, oh, this is how I'm feeling, this is what my week's been like. Having my own personal therapy has been really helpful. Journaling, making some time to play guitar or something like that. Doing something that takes me out of that space. In light of the pandemic and the racism that's really amplified right now in the media, and seeing footage and hearing interviews that can be quite painful and distressing and quite traumatic really to see and hear. They're all conversations that are really important to have, but it can take a lot out of me emotionally, and it's probably the same for a lot of people. Given that I'm a black trans man, these are things that I do think about often. So this period of time has generated so many painful feelings for me. I had to be a lot more kind to myself when I can be, and utilise the support when it's there, and also seek it a bit more than I normally would, just to try and process all of those things. Given that it's Pride Month now, and knowing that this year we won't be able to celebrate Pride in the same way, but also reflecting on the history of Pride and the Stonewall riots, and considering the fact that trans women of colour have been disproportionately dying for a long time, and trans people have been on the receiving end of violence and discrimination for a long time, are all really painful things to reflect on. It's been really hard to to be trying to process those things and managing a session. I think particularly when those themes kind of come up. I'm a trans person counselling trans clients, but each of us all will have a different experience of being trans, and being aware of what I may represent to someone has been something to keep in mind. I think this is part of the challenge of being within a marginalised community and also counselling people within that community, and all the different ways that things can overlap. Something that was relayed back to me by clients is this sense of losing connection with the community. And I think that's another reason that's been so important to retain the counselling relationship in a period like this.
So the final slide is self-care, and I guess this has been embedded throughout, and I don't think it's limited to counsellors that can embed this practice. So I think the important things to talk about are clinical supervision, having that person that you can speak to. For me, I'm lucky I have fortnightly supervision where I can get someone to check in around my practice and to explore and to connect with peers and get messages. For me, I feel with supervision spaces, even if I'm not talking, there are messages that relate to my therapeutic work. So it's, yeah, and peer support has really been important, having professional peers, and other peers in my relationship, having a support network that I schedule in talks with, just to be, is really important.
Yeah.
Since lockdown, I've started a weekly quiz night with a friend. I started Reiki, and these were all things that helped me to be a practitioner, to be able to be present.
Yeah, and yeah, because that's like you touched on about self-care. That's part of it, of you being present, you being taking care of you. And I know that I love gardening, but I love growing food to eat. And so that's really been an investment in the last few weeks, even more so.
Yeah. And also knowing my limitations, what can't I work with? What may present as a challenge now in this time that wasn't a challenge before?
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about intersectionality, and maybe that's a limitation. If I'm not able to go there and I'm not going there, then that I need to flag that. I need to offer the client a therapist that will be with them.
Yeah, but have we gone there? Have we gone there enough with what's happening with all the Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd? And have we gone there about how that's impacted? I was going to say globally. I think it is globally.
I don't know. I think that, I think if we've got time, let's go there now. Actually, I work with a lot of Black clients because they want to be in relationship with a Black therapist, and there has been so much open honesty about my client struggles, but also my struggles with seeing death, with needing to take more care of myself, to sharing resources of healing circles or bereavement and loss groups, because that is the reality. And before we had George Floyd, and this movement, which I love, and I'm so behind, it's giving me an energy, at the same time it's hurting, and I'm like this. Torn was lockdown, COVID. I lost a lot of loved ones. Disproportionately, my family and my communities were suffering, and so being with clients had to acknowledge that I needed time. I took a break from my client work for a week, so I can't be there. I'm not here.
No, and powerful things globally that's happening. It's happening.
And it's uncomfortable. Sorry, I've cut you. But it's uncomfortable, and I think to go there, you need to be. I remember when I first started to bring what I refer to then as being cisgender and into the space and owning that. I was like, how do I say it? It might be clumsy. But what was clumsy was not to say it. And so if you're sitting there with Black clients, with people that you don't understand their experience, like, what if I say the wrong thing? I promise you, from my experience, the silence is the wrong thing, the not saying.
I don't know if I could love you more, but I do. Seriously. And you inspire me to be real more and be real with myself and be real with you. And I'm feeling tearful. But thank you for that. I really appreciate
Thank you.
who you are.
Thank you. I really appreciate who you are, Michelle, in this relationship. And yeah. And going there. It's painful.
Yeah,
It's painful.
it is painful.
I feel, for me, that feels like a natural place to sort of end, to
Yeah.
thank people for joining, and to challenge them to sit with their pain and to sit with uncomfortable feelings and care for yourself to work through them.
Yeah, I'll leave those last words with you at such say thank you for watching, if people who do watch, and they can contact us on if they need to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Remy.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
Thank you.